Hello, my name's Critter Bear. I am still a beginner flute maker, and today I was going to share with you an update that I have actually made to the Bear flute design. For all the people who aren't interested in knowing all of the adventures and how I specifically came to this design and everything, I will skip over to the bullet points here. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that I replaced the joint of the Bear flute with a bit of brass. It took me a long time to figure out how to get it right, but the brass joint is ultimately, comparatively to the previous flute, a lot stronger, more user-friendly, easier, smoother, a little bit more expensive in materials to make, but ultimately I do think that it is worth the cost, because the old design of flute that I have, while still good and usable and still worked and cheap and available to me at the time with the knowledge and tools that I had, brass is ultimately a lot better. So I think that it's a worthwhile change. Second bullet point, I updated the Bear flute paw symbol so that it more reflects the more fantasy, whimsical vibe that I like. So my wife ended up drawing something out, and then we got a sketch pad for digital art, and then digitized it, sent it off to Etsy for somebody to carve into a branding iron, and so on and so forth. It was a whole process. Third bullet point is that the flute itself, the embouchure holes are more consistent, they're smoother, the tone holes are more consistent and smoother, the finish is more consistent and smoother, so the design of the flute is just smoother, better, and more consistent in general. And the fourth bullet point is that the price is going to increase. Now, while my older flutes were just me trying to figure out how to make flutes and to be a better flute maker in general, so I charged as little of a price as physically possible. These flutes are honestly better and nicer, to where I do think that they deserve a slight price increase, but not so much that you can't still afford it. But it's also just the fact that inflation and cost of living and everything is going up, so my time is worth a little bit more. And on top of that, I thought that it took me about an hour to make a flute. Turns out that it takes me about 2 hours. So it is going to increase from $20 to $40. Of course, there's going to be shipping on top of that, which I'll check with UPS, but I do think that it's probably about $16 now, since they started increasing their prices as well. So you're looking at about like $55, $56-ish maybe total. So it's still better than pretty much any other beginner flute out there for the quality that you're getting. It's still PVC, it's still a wood finish on the outside, still trying to make it as cheap and affordable as possible, but I am upgrading my tools to make things smoother, nicer, and faster, and if I get fast enough, I might be able to even bring that price back down a little bit, maybe even to $30 instead. Now, for all of you who want to hear the adventures and everything that I've been on in order to make this flute possible, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, I will make another video, of course, that you can listen to the tuning of it, just played directly into a microphone with no editing whatsoever, and a short tune to follow with it as well, of course. But actually, this time around, if you're interested, you've pretty much been listening to it this whole time. This is just a little bit of editing, of course, for performance's sake, but you can see that video here, and you can see the tuning and just straight into a microphone video here. So pull the whole YouTuber, like you've been listening to it the whole time thing, thought would be pretty fun. But if you're interested in me hearing all the adventures and things that I've been on to get to this point, stick around. I got some things to share. So during COVID is whenever I started to make time to learn this, but after COVID, I of course no longer had the time. I split my life between live action role playing, Dungeons and Dragons, traditional Irish music, and flute making. Last year was dedicated to the fact that I found out about 3D printing and had to figure out what that was about, how to make it work properly and consistently to make my Dungeons & Dragons games more interesting and affordable and nice. So after I sold about 210 of my other flutes, I stopped entirely knowing that I had this to tackle, but then whenever I came back to it, I told myself if I were going to, I would update the joint/tuning slide design, because that was the one thing that I really thought could be improved. So the first question was, what material do I want to use? There's stainless steel, there was aluminum, there's brass, there's copper, there's all sorts of different materials that you could use whenever it comes to metal. But ultimately, I thought the brass looked really good as used in instruments as it stands already. But whenever it comes to the sizing of brass, if I try and look for a 5/8 or a 15/16 or something in America Freedom measurements, don't really find as many options as you need out there. So whenever I switched over to millimeter though, you find pretty much any millimeter you want, which ended up working out very well for me. So at first I went with 24 millimeters because of the fact that it was the same. It was like, oh, this is about the size that I've been drilling out as it is right now. So it's like, the outer diameter is good. Let's do 24 millimeter inner diameter, 25 outer millimeter thick. It's going to be strong and nice. So I tried black PVC, and I ended up not liking it that much because it's a softer material and therefore didn't resonate very well with me. If somebody wants a different color flute, I'll just add a different color underneath the clear gloss coat that I put over the top of it, and that works out fine, and you can have the resonance that you need with the color that you want. I was also making flutes with 3 parts instead of 2 because I thought that drilling into the body of the flute would be too long for my lathe to handle. So I made 3 parts with black PVC, put the brass in them, and the intonation was way off. Between the lower and upper octaves sounded like a different instrument entirely than what it was supposed to sound like. So the first thing that I did was remove that second joint so that I could narrow down the issue. And I figured out how to make my lathe work with the body and the head joint and drilling into them just as 2 solid pieces. So that ended up working out fine, but still, the upper and lower octaves were way off. So I was like, okay, we eliminated that. The only other thing that is different with this flute compared to the other one was that there's a brass joint in there. Everything else is the same, so something has to be going on with the brass that is not working out. Well, what's different about the brass? Well, the inner diameter of the brass is not the same as the PVC. So maybe if I change the measurement, it will work. So I ended up going from 24 millimeters to 22, and it did change it. It wasn't correct, but the 24 millimeters played too sharp in the second octave, and the 22 millimeter played too flat in the second octave. So I was on to something. So I went for 23 millimeter, which was perfect. Now that I had built a prototype that worked and I enjoyed it, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the brass and I'm going to flip it to where the brass is glued into the head joint and inserting into the body, so that the head joint and the body are actually more in line with each other's sizing, so that they could pack better, they could ship better, because they're relatively the same size, as opposed to beforehand, my flutes were, the body is very long and the head joint is pretty small. I wanted to switch that up, and I figured flipping it would not make a difference whatsoever. Boy, was I wrong. Because I was like, oh, I just flip it and it's going to be the same thing. No worries. I built 10 of them, start to finish. I made them and I was ready to sell them, and they're going to be great. So I started playing with them after they were built, and I didn't like it. I tried it for like an hour, 2 hours. I tried to make it work. I tried to figure out how to make the intonation work, but the second octave was just off in various weird ways. It's hard to notice but I just didn't like it as much. So all 10 of those that I had finished, like completely made and ready to sell and excited about it, man, I was excited about it, I had to throw them away. So from there, I asked myself, okay, the brass placement affects it somehow. Let's experiment with that, because we gotta stop trying to sell the flutes and instead figure out what's going on here, even though I really don't want to. So I build one flute that is just like Doug Tipples, to where the head joint is very small and the brass goes into the body and it sounds good. It sounds in tune. I'm like, cool. Doug Tipples' design is good, but I like my own a little bit more. Everybody likes their own flavor just slightly, so I'm like, I want to change mine to like differentiate mine and his, at least to some degree. I don't want to be copying directly off of what he's doing, so let me try and find my own placement. I made one that is where the head joint and the gap is between the brass and the PVC is the same if it were attached to the head joint still and moving into the body. I didn't like it. It still sounded too sharp, I believe is what it was. So then I went in between those two, and I did one with the brass going into the body, and I did one with the brass going into the head joint. The one going into the body was real close, but it was still slightly off. It was still slightly too sharp, and I didn't like it as much. But then I made one that was my old style of flute, where it is exactly in the same place, exactly the same spacing, but the joint itself is just brass instead of PVC. And it is perfect. And it makes me so mad that I went through all of that to get back to my original shot in the dark design. I didn't know that that's where the joint needed to be in order for it to sound correct. I just made a guess, and that guess apparently was really correct. And it's I'd say it's almost upsetting, but it's pretty upsetting. That once again it took me all of that to figure out, no, just go with your old design, just replace the brass with 23 millimeter inner diameter brass instead of 24 or 22 and so on. So I built one and I made sure that it was absolutely correct. You can see that I have 10 others pretty close to done. They're on the way. The PVC is all heat treated and everything. I just got to put the holes in it. The corks and the wedges and everything is all done. So they'll be on the way here soon. But I just wanted to update you guys to let you know what was going on. Keep an eye out. I'm going to be doing more whistle and flute reviews in the future so that I can help other people who are trying to decide what instrument to get started with, even if it's not my own, to make their most informed decision via yet another perspective. If everybody in the world did their own perspective on what instrument would be good to start with, we'd have a better idea as to what actually people want out of a beginner instrument. But I'm only one. There's going to be many others, I'm sure, other people who have reviews, but I think one more review always helps. Stay tuned. Hopefully I'll be able to make these more casually now that I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel again, and I can just churn out flutes until I have a need to upgrade the design. But for now, I think the design is going to stay this way for who knows how long. And I think that's pretty much it. So, catch you guys later.